He said I was comfortable. That was the word he used, standing in our kitchen on a Tuesday morning, coffee going cold on the counter like he'd been rehearsing it. "Nora, you're comfortable, but I need more than comfortable." I didn't throw anything, didn't cry. Just stood there in my work clothes while Brent Hale told me 18 months of marriage wasn't exciting enough for him. 3 weeks later, he moved in with Tiffany Marsh. 18 months after that, I walked into the Harrington Foundation Gala in downtown Chicago on the arm of Reid Weston, whose family name was on 2 buildings I passed every morning on my commute, and I felt fine. Then I saw Brent across the room, with her. The way he looked at me stopped my breath for exactly 1 second, and then Reid's hand found the small of my back, and he said 4 words that changed everything. I need to back up, because the night of the gala didn't come from nowhere, and if I start there, you'll think this is a revenge story. It's not. Or it's not only that. It's about what happens when you stop trying to be what someone wanted and start figuring out what you actually are. My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, the kind of neighborhood where the houses are old and the families are older and everyone knows everyone through someone else. My father was a contractor. My mother taught middle school English for 26 years. I have one older brother, Patrick, who still lives 3 miles from where we grew up and coaches youth hockey on weekends. We are not a flashy family. We are a practical, capable, moderately stubborn Irish Catholic family, and I say that with complete affection. I met Brent Hale at 28 at a mutual friend's birthday dinner at a wine bar in Lincoln Park. He was good-looking in a predictable way. Dark hair, square jaw, the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having had a reason to doubt yourself. He was a sales director at a pharmaceutical company. He wore good shoes. He laughed at the right moments. I thought he was solid. I thought solid was what I wanted. We dated for 2 years and got married in a small ceremony at a venue in the West Loop. My mother cried. Patrick gave a toast that was too long and too honest, and everyone loved it. Brent's family flew in from Cincinnati, and his mother hugged me twice and said, "Welcome to the family," both times, like she meant it. The first year was fine. The second year was quieter. Not bad, just quieter. We worked, we came home, we had dinner, we watched things. We talked about refinishing the floors in the condo and never did it. He traveled for work more than he used to. I picked up more hours at the firm where I worked as an operations manager. We were, in the word he would eventually use, comfortable. I didn't know comfortable was an insult until he made it one. The Tuesday he left, I called Patrick from the parking garage under my office building. I sat in my car and told him what happened, and Patrick was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Do you want me to come over?" I said no. "Do you want me to not come over but also go have a conversation with Brent?" "Patrick, that's a no? That's a no." He came over anyway, with a pizza and a 6-pack. And we sat on my couch, the couch that was technically half Brent's, but that Brent had told me to keep magnanimously, like he was doing me a favor, and Patrick didn't say much. He didn't have to. That's the thing about people who have known you your whole life. They know when to talk and when to just sit. The divorce was straightforward. No kids, divided assets without much argument. Brent moved out and moved in with Tiffany within the same month, which answered the question I hadn't let myself ask out loud. How long had this been going on before he told me? I didn't dig into that. I made a deliberate choice not to dig into it because I knew that road led somewhere I didn't want to spend time in. I focused instead on the practical things. I kept the condo. I refinished the floors myself with Patrick's help over a long weekend. And when it was done, I stood in the middle of my living room, and the floors were beautiful, and they were mine, and something small but real shifted in my chest. That was the beginning of the year that changed everything. I got a better job. Not dramatically better. I wasn't headhunted by some corporation overnight. I just started applying, which I'd been putting off for 2 years. And 3 months later, I was the director of operations at Meridian Group, a mid-sized commercial real estate firm with offices in the Loop. The salary jump was significant. The work was harder and more interesting. I started getting up earlier, not because I had to, but because I actually wanted to get to the office. I started running again. I'd run in college and stopped sometime in the first year of marriage when the weekends filled up with Brent's work events and social obligations. I started again, slowly, just the lakefront trail in the mornings, and within a few months I was doing half marathons on weekends like it was nothing, earbuds in, feet on pavement, thinking clearly for the first time in years. I bought myself a really good coat, dark camel wool, fitted, the kind of coat that makes you stand differently when you put it on. I'd been looking at it in a store window on Michigan Avenue for 6 months during the marriage and always talked myself out of it. I went back and bought it on a Thursday afternoon without deliberating and wore it home on the train. Small things, all small things. But they added up into someone I recognized more than the woman who'd stood in that kitchen, hearing the word comfortable without arguing back. That was the context for Reid Weston. I met him through work. Meridian Group was handling a commercial lease negotiation for a property that Weston Capital had interest in. Reid's company, which he'd built from the foundation of his family's old money into something considerably larger and more modern. He came into our offices for an initial meeting on a Wednesday morning, and he was not what I expected. I'd looked him up before the meeting, of course I had. Reid Weston, 39, CEO of Weston Capital, listed in Chicago business magazines, 40 under 42 years running. The photos showed a man in expensive suits at charity events, the kind of person who occupied space in a room without trying. I expected someone who talked the way powerful people sometimes talk, like everyone else in the room is slightly behind. He wasn't like that. He sat across the conference table and asked specific, intelligent questions and listened to the answers. Not performed listening, actual listening, where his eyes stayed on whoever was speaking. He had a dry sense of humor that arrived without announcement. When one of our senior brokers made an error in a projected figure and caught it mid-sentence, Reid said quietly, "Good catch," and moved on without making it a moment. I noticed that. The meeting went long. When it wrapped up and people were gathering their things, he paused beside me at the door. "You were the only person in that room who pushed back on my timeline," he said. I looked at him. "Your timeline was optimistic." It was. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Same time next week?" That was it. He left. I went back to my office and looked at my notes and didn't think about him for the rest of the day, except for the moment on the train home when I realized I'd thought about that exchange 3 times since it happened. Over the following weeks, the deal negotiation continued, and Reid and I found ourselves in the same rooms regularly. He was direct and I was direct, and we disagreed productively and came to agreements efficiently, and I told myself it was simply a good professional working relationship. Then one evening, we were both still in the conference room after everyone else had left. Him on the phone with someone in his office, me finishing up notes. And when he hung up, he looked over at me and said, "Have you eaten?" I had not eaten. We went to a restaurant 2 blocks from the office. Not fancy, just good, the kind of place with small tables and a bartender who knew Reid's name. We talked for 2 hours, not about the deal, about Chicago, about his mother, who had grown up in Bridgeport, about my brother Patrick and the hockey kids, about what it was like to run the lakefront at 5 in the morning when the lake was flat and gray and the city was just waking up. Walking back to the parking garage, I was aware of the cold and the sound of my own footsteps, and the fact that my chest felt lighter than it had in a long time. Something was different. I wasn't sure yet what to do about it. Over the next several weeks, the Weston Capital deal moved forward, and Reid and I kept finding reasons to be in the same room. I noticed I stopped dreading the Wednesday meetings. Then I started looking forward to them. Then I started arriving 5 minutes early, which I told myself was professionalism, and which Patrick, when I mentioned it casually over the phone one evening, immediately identified as something else entirely. "You're talking about him differently," Patrick said. "I'm talking about a client." "You're talking about a client the way you used to talk about—" "Patrick, I'm just noting the tone." "Goodbye, Patrick." I hung up. Then I sat in my kitchen and looked at the refinished floors for a while. The thing about Reid that I wasn't ready to say out loud yet was that he was genuinely good company. Not good company in the way people perform good company at business dinners, not the practiced laugh, not the careful questions designed to make you feel seen while revealing nothing about themselves. He was good company the way people are when they're not particularly concerned with managing your impression of them. He disagreed with me openly, not combatively, just directly, the way confident people do when they're not worried about the outcome. He changed his position when I made a better argument and said so without ceremony. He remembered things I'd mentioned in passing, that my mother taught English, that Patrick coached hockey, and asked follow-up questions weeks later like he'd been thinking about it. That was the detail that got me, not the obvious things, the follow-up questions. One Thursday evening, late, we were the last two people in the building again. The cleaning crew had been through. The overhead lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting. We were going through a revised contract clause at the conference table, and Reid had been quiet for longer than usual, reading a section I'd flagged. He set the papers down. "Can I ask you something that's not about the contract?" My pen stopped. "Okay. How long were you married?" I looked at him. His expression was level, not prying, just asking, the way he asked everything, like he genuinely wanted to know and was prepared for any answer. "1.5 years," I said. He nodded slowly. "What happened?" He said I was comfortable. I said it the way I'd learned to say it, cleanly, without the weight it used to carry. Said he needed more than comfortable. Reid was quiet for a moment. His hand was flat on the table. He was an idiot. I almost laughed. I've arrived at that conclusion independently. Recently or a while ago? Somewhere in the middle of refinishing my floors. He looked at me for a second, then the corner of his mouth moved. "I want to hear about the floors." So I told him. The whole weekend, Patrick showing up with the wrong sandpaper, the two of us arguing about technique while sawdust covered everything, the moment it was done and how it looked in the late afternoon light. Reid listened with the particular attention he gave everything, leaning slightly forward, elbows on the table. When I finished, he said, "That's the most satisfied I've heard you sound since I met you." My chest did something I chose not to examine immediately. It's good floors. It's not about the floors. He was right. It wasn't about the floors. I changed the subject back to the contract and he let me, which I appreciated. That was another thing about him. He knew when to press and when to let something breathe. That spring, the deal closed. There was no longer a professional reason for us to be in the same rooms regularly. I told myself that was fine. I went back to my normal schedule, my morning runs, my good coat on the train, my quiet condo with the beautiful floors. His text came on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after the closing. "Jazz at the Green Mill tomorrow. I have an extra ticket and Patrick seems busy." I stared at my phone. Then I typed, "How do you know Patrick is busy?" "I don't. I'm assuming. Is he busy?" I was smiling before I caught myself. "I'll check with Patrick," I typed. "Don't," he wrote back. I didn't. The Green Mill was everything a Saturday night in Chicago should be. Dim light, the smell of old wood and good whiskey, the quartet working through something unhurried while conversations hummed underneath. Reid got there before me and had already ordered. He stood when I arrived, which was old-fashioned and slightly formal, and somehow exactly right. We didn't talk about work. We talked about everything else. He told me about growing up with the weight of his family's name, the expectation that came with it, the ways he'd tried to prove the company was his own thing and not just inherited furniture. He said it quietly, looking at his glass, and I understood that this was not a thing he said often. "Does it still feel that way?" I asked. "Like you're proving something?" He thought about it. "Less than it used to." He looked up. There was a period where I made every decision to counter some imagined version of my father looking over my shoulder. That's exhausting." "What changed?" "I stopped trying to be different from him and started trying to be better. Smaller target." He paused. "Less exhausting." I thought about Brent's word. Comfortable. The way I'd spent months trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, what I'd failed to be, before I understood that his need for something different was his story, not mine. "I know something about imaginary audiences," I said. He looked at me. "Tell me." So I did. Not everything, not yet, but more than I'd told most people. About the way I'd spent the year after the divorce trying to figure out what I'd been missing in myself, and how slowly I'd realized I hadn't been missing anything. that the person Brent had found insufficient was actually just a person he hadn't understood. Reid was very still while I talked. The music continued behind us. When I finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then, "He missed you while you were right there." The sentence landed in the center of my chest and stayed there. I looked at my drink. "I think so. Yeah. His loss," Reid said. Simple, final, like it was just a fact. The quartet moved into something warmer and slower, and the conversation shifted, and I did not bring up Brent again that evening. But something had settled between us in the way things settle when two people have been honest with each other, and both chose not to run from it. The news about Brent came from a colleague at my old firm, a woman named Dana who still moved in those circles and occasionally texted me updates I hadn't asked for, but wasn't entirely sorry to receive. "Saw Brent and the new one at the Meridian Club charity dinner last night. He looked uncomfortable the whole time. Just thought you should know." I read it standing in the kitchen making coffee. My body had a reaction I hadn't expected, not the chest drop of old grief, but something more clinical, a noting, the way you note weather. What I felt, more than anything, was a clean and genuine lack of interest. What I felt after that, when I thought about it more carefully, was something closer to relief. Not that he was uncomfortable. I didn't wish him discomfort, not genuinely, but relief that I was standing in my kitchen with good floors and a job I liked and a man who asked follow-up questions. Ian Brent Hale occupied approximately zero space in the actual shape of my life. Dana texted again. "Also, he apparently told someone at the table you two ended mutually. Just FYI, I almost replied. Then I put the phone down and poured my coffee. He could have whatever version of the story he needed. It didn't change mine. That evening, Reid called. Not texted, called, which he did occasionally, and which I had stopped pretending was ordinary. "The Harrington Foundation Gala is in 3 weeks, he said. I knew the Harrington Gala. Everyone in Chicago's professional and social world knew the Harrington Gala. Black tie, the grand ballroom at the Palmer House, the city's biggest names and the causes they publicly supported. I had attended once, years ago, with Brent, when his company had bought a table. "I know it," I said. "Ma, I'd like you to come with me." Something shifted in my chest, not quite nerves, something more alert than nerves. "As what?" I asked, not coyly, genuinely. We'd been in a space for weeks that neither of us had named directly, and I needed to know what he was asking. Reid was quiet for exactly 1 beat. "As the person I want next to me in a room full of people I have to talk to," he said. "Is that enough of an answer?" My hand was tight on the phone. "It's a good answer." "Then you'll come?" Outside my window, Chicago was doing its evening thing. Lights coming on, the lake somewhere dark beyond the buildings, the particular energy of a city that doesn't fully stop. "I'll come," I said. I didn't know then that Brent would be in that room. I didn't know what was going to happen when he saw me. But I think, somewhere underneath the part I was paying attention to, some part of me already knew this night was going to matter. The 3 weeks before the gala were the best 3 weeks I'd had, in longer than I could accurately measure. Reid and I settled into something that didn't have a clean label yet but had a shape. Tuesday evenings at a wine bar on Randolph Street where the bartender knew to bring his usual without asking. Saturday mornings where he'd text a location and I'd meet him there. A farmer's market in the West Loop, a coffee place in Wicker Park he said had the best cardamom latte in the city, which was a specific enough claim that I took it seriously. He was right about the coffee. I didn't tell him immediately. I made him ask. "Well?" I took another sip, looked out the window. "It's fine." His expression didn't move. "You've taken 4 sips in 90 seconds. I'm hydrating. With a latte." I put the cup down. "It's the best cardamom latte I've ever had. Don't make it a thing." He made it a thing. He texted Patrick about it. I don't know how he got Patrick's number, and I chose not to investigate. Patrick's response forwarded to me. "She's like this about everything she loves. It means she really likes it." I called Patrick immediately. "You gave him your number?" He asked. "When did he ask?" "When you brought him to that hockey game 3 weeks ago. I had brought Reid to one of Patrick's youth games on a Sunday, casually, because Reid had asked about the kids after I mentioned them, and it seemed easier to show than to explain. Reid had stood at the boards in a good coat, looking slightly formal in a hockey rink context. And within 15 minutes, Patrick had him timing drills, and one of the 11-year-olds had asked him if he was famous. "I didn't know you two were texting," I said. "We're not texting. He sent one message about the coffee." Patrick paused. "Nora, don't. I'm just going to say one thing." "Patrick." "He looked at you the whole game." Silence. "That's all I'm saying," Patrick said. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen. I looked at the floors. My chest felt like something was trying to open that I'd kept carefully shut for 18 months, and I was not entirely sure I was ready for it to open, and I was becoming increasingly sure that it was going to open anyway. The news about Brent came on a Wednesday, 10 days before the gala. Dana again. This time a phone call, not a text. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not be weird about it," she said. My shoulders pulled back. That sentence never precedes good news. Brent's company bought a table at the Harrington Gala. The kitchen was very quiet. "Okay," I said. "He and Tiffany will be there. I have it from 2 sources. I just thought you should know before you walked in." I put one hand flat on the counter. The tile was cold under my palm. "I appreciate you telling me. Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You said that very quickly." "Dana." Okay, you're fine." She paused. "Are you going with Reid Weston?" "Yes." "Nora." Her voice shifted. "He's on the host committee." I knew what that meant. Reid wouldn't just be attending, he'd be central, visible. He'd be the man that everyone in that room knew, and I would be the woman beside him. I understood, in that moment, what the evening was going to look like before it happened, and something complicated moved through me. Not anticipation, not quite. Something more unsettled. I called Reid that evening. He answered on the second ring. "I need to tell you something," I said. I heard my own voice, and it was steady but careful. "My ex-husband is going to be at the gala with his wife." Silence, not a long one. "Does that change whether you want to come?" he asked. "No." "Okay. Clean, simple. I just didn't want you to walk into the room not knowing." "I appreciate that." Another beat. "Does it change anything for you? About the evening?" I thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet." "That's a fair answer." His voice was even, not performing ease, actually easy. "For what it's worth, I'm not going to behave differently because he's in the room. You can decide how you want to handle it when we get there." My hand loosened slightly on the phone. "You're very calm about this." "One of us should be." Something close to a laugh moved through me. "That's generous." "It's practical." A pause. "Nora." "Yeah. Whatever you felt about him, I'm not asking you to have resolved it by Saturday. You're allowed to walk into that room and feel complicated." I stood in my living room in the dark, the city lights coming through the windows, and I pressed my lips together for a moment. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay," he said. "I need to tell you what Brent's word actually did to me. The word comfortable. Because I'd been carrying it for 18 months and telling myself and everyone around me that I'd processed it, set it down, moved forward. And mostly I had. But there's a difference between setting something down and being free of it. And I didn't understand that difference until 9 days before the gala when I was running the lakefront at 5:30 in the morning, and it hit me all at once. Comfortable meant he'd looked at everything I was and decided it wasn't interesting. That was the part I hadn't said out loud. Not to Patrick, not to Dana, not to Reid. The part I'd dressed up in practical language and forward momentum and good floors and a good coat. Underneath all of it was this: the man I'd chosen had assessed me at full view and found me insufficient, and no matter how clearly I understood that his judgment was wrong and limited, and more about him than about me, the assessment had still happened. He had still said it. I had still heard it. And now I was walking into a room where he would see exactly what came after him. I stopped running, stood on the path with the lake gray and flat on my left, and Chicago lit up on my right, and my breath making clouds in the cold air. My hands were cold inside my gloves. I wasn't going to pretend I didn't want him to see. I wasn't going to pretend that some part of this evening wasn't going to feel like something. But what I needed it to not be was the point. I needed the gala to be what Reid had asked it to be, a room full of people he had to talk to and me beside him. I needed Brent Hale to be incidental, a thing that happened in the background of a night that was actually about something else. I started running again. By the time I got home, I decided I was going to be fine, not the quick answer fine I'd given Dana. Actually fine, or I was working on it. The night of the gala was cold and clear. I got ready at home alone, which was deliberate. I'd turned down Dana's offer to come over, turned down Patrick's offer to provide what he called moral support, and what I suspected was actually curiosity. I needed the hour before to be quiet. The dress was dark navy, simple cut, bought 2 weeks earlier on a lunch break without overthinking it. My mother's pearl earrings, the camel coat over the top until I got inside. I looked in the mirror once, and my reflection looked like a person who had built something real and was walking into a room to prove nothing. I almost believed it. Reid's car arrived at 7. He was already inside it. When I got in, he looked at me for a moment, just looked the way he looked at things he was taking in fully, and said, "You look like yourself." I turned to him. "Is that a compliment?" "It's the best one I know how to give." My chest did the thing again. I looked out the window at the city moving past. "You clean up all right," I told him. High praise. We rode in comfortable silence, and I noticed I used that word in my own head and felt nothing. Comfortable. Just a word. Just a true description of two people who didn't need to fill space to prove they were okay. The Palmer house was lit up in full when we arrived. Valets, string lights visible through the tall windows, the low sound of the jazz quartet already coming from inside. Reid's hand found mine at the entrance, and we went in. The grand ballroom was everything it always was. High ceilings, chandeliers, round tables dressed in white linen, Chicago's best in black tie filling every corner. Then the smell of warm food and expensive perfume and the particular charged air of a room where everyone knows they're being watched and most of them enjoy it. Reid was stopped 3 times before we reached the middle of the room. A city councilman, a woman from the foundation board who kissed his cheek, a developer I recognized from industry events. He handled each one the way he handled everything, direct, warm without being performed, extracting himself cleanly when the conversation had run its course. Each time he came back to my side. Each time his hand found mine again without discussion. The quartet moved into something from Coltrane. The room was loud and warm and beautiful. And then I saw Brent. He was across the ballroom, near the bar, and he was already looking in my direction. Tiffany was beside him in a pink dress, her hand on his arm, saying something to another couple. But Brent wasn't listening to her. He was looking at me. My stomach dropped exactly 1 inch. My hand tightened in Reid's. I don't know if Reid felt it. I think he did. Brent's expression was doing something complicated. Recognition first, then recalculation, the way a face does when it's processing something that doesn't match the story it had been carrying. His eyes moved from me to Reid, and then back to me. Reid leaned slightly toward me. His voice was quiet, only for me. "You good?" I exhaled once, shoulders down. "Yeah," I said. I was working on it. Brent started moving toward us. Brent moved through the crowd the way he always moved, with the particular ease of a man who had never once walked into a room and wondered if he belonged in it. Shoulders relaxed, drink in hand. The slight forward lean of someone heading somewhere with purpose. Tiffany was a step behind him, still mid-conversation with the other couple, not yet aware he'd started moving. I watched him come and I kept my breathing even, and I thought about the lakefront at 5:30 in the morning and the cold air and the decision I'd made. Incidental. He was going to be incidental. Reid was talking to someone to my left, a man from the foundation board who'd appeared at his elbow with a question about the evening's program. Reid had one hand still loosely at my back and was answering the question with his full attention, because that was how he did everything. Brent stopped in front of me. "Nora." He said my name like he was confirming something, like he needed to hear it out loud to believe what his eyes were telling him. "Da, Brent." I kept my voice level, not cold, level. There's a difference, and I was very conscious of it. He looked good. He always looked good. That was never the issue. But up close, there was something slightly effortful about his expression, the way it happens when a person is trying to appear more relaxed than they are. I didn't know you were coming tonight, he said. I come to things, I said simply. His eyes moved to Reid again, then back. Who are you here with? Before I could answer, Reid's hand pressed slightly at my back, not possessive, just present, and he turned from his conversation. He looked at Brent with an expression that was entirely pleasant and entirely unimpressed. Reid Weston. He extended his hand. Brent shook it. His jaw was doing something careful. Brent Hale. I know. Reid said it simply. No edge. Just a statement of fact that somehow contained everything. A beat of silence that was 3 seconds long and felt considerably longer. Tiffany appeared at Brent's side. She was pretty in the way of someone who worked at it, highlighted hair, careful makeup, the pink dress fitted and deliberate. She looked between me and Brent with an expression that was still arranging itself. This is Tiffany, Brent said. He put his hand at her back. The gesture was slightly too firm. My wife. The word landed. I felt it in my sternum, not the devastation it might have been a year ago, but something. A small, dull pressure, the confirmation of a fact I'd known for months but hadn't heard, stated directly in front of me. Tiffany extended her hand to me. It's nice to meet you. Her voice was careful in the way voices get when people have been briefed about a situation and are managing their delivery. You too, I said. I shook her hand. I looked at her directly. She was not a cartoon. She was a person in a pink dress who had married a man I understood better than she probably did yet. I didn't wish her anything unkind. Brent's attention had shifted to Reid in the way men's attention shifts when they've located the variable they're actually trying to assess. Weston Capital, he said. The recognition in his voice had a specific texture. Recalibration. You're on the host committee this year. Every year, Reid said. Great organization. Brent nodded, the nod of a man buying time. Nora, how do you two know each other? The question was aimed at me, but his eyes were still on Reid. What he was actually asking was, how serious is this? And how long has it been going on? And did it overlap with us? Those were the 3 questions inside the one question, and we both knew it. I opened my mouth. We met through a deal negotiation, Reid said. Easy, conversational. She pushed back on my timeline, and I respected that. Something moved across Brent's face, too fast to name, but I'd spent 2 years learning his expressions. That sounds like Nora, he said. He said it with a small laugh, the kind that was meant to signal familiarity. I know her. I have history with her. I have context you don't. It was a territorial thing dressed as a compliment, and I recognized it immediately. Reid looked at him for a moment. It does, he agreed. No small laugh, just agreement. The band shifted into something upbeat. The room moved around us. Tiffany said something to Brent in a low voice, and he nodded without looking at her. His attention was still on me, and I understood now what was in his expression. It was the look of a man revising a conclusion he'd been comfortable with. He had left something he called comfortable, and now that comfortable thing was standing in a navy dress in the Palmer House ballroom next to a man whose name was on buildings, and none of the math was adding up the way Brent needed it to. It's good to see you doing well, he said finally. The sentence had the shape of sincerity and the texture of something else. Thank you, I said. Clean. He looked at Reid one more time, then at me. Something crossed his face. I won't name it as what I think it was, because that's a territory I'm not interested in. But it was real, and it was complicated, and it was his to manage. We should get back, he said to Tiffany. They moved away. I tracked them in my peripheral vision until they were absorbed back into the crowd. Reid was very still beside me for a moment. Then, you all right? My hands were steady. My breathing was steady. The dull pressure in my sternum was already fading. I'm fine, I said. And then, actually fine. Not quick answer fine. I know the difference, he said. I know you do. We stood for a moment in the warm noise of the ballroom. The quartet was doing something with brushed drums and a walking bass line that vibrated slightly in the floor. He said it like a compliment, Reid said quietly. Knowing your pushback thing. I heard. Did he ever actually appreciate it when it was inconvenient? My chest tightened once. No, I said. He didn't. Reid nodded slowly. Right. That one word held everything I needed it to hold. We moved through the evening and I found my footing. This was the thing I hadn't anticipated, that once Brent was present and I'd survived the initial encounter, the rest of the room opened up and became what it actually was. A beautiful Chicago night. Good music. Interesting people. Reid beside me, introducing me to Foundation board members and city officials and people I recognized from the business section of the Tribune, and each time he said my name, it was the full version. Not a colleague, not a friend. He said, Nora Callahan, and let the context speak. I found myself talking to a woman named Charlotte who ran an arts education nonprofit on the South Side. And we were deep into a conversation about funding models before I fully registered that 20 minutes had passed and I hadn't thought about Brent once. That was the moment I understood what Reid had given me by bringing me here. Not armor, not a status symbol on his arm. Access to a version of the evening that was completely, genuinely mine. I caught him watching me from across a small cluster of people, and he raised his glass slightly. I shook my head, not dismissively, just at him, the way you shake your head at someone you've figured out. He smiled. Small. Real. My pulse did what my pulse had been doing for weeks, and I stopped trying to categorize it. Then Dana appeared. She materialized at my elbow with a glass of champagne and an expression that was working very hard to be casual and failing completely. Don't say anything, I said. I'm not saying anything. Your face is saying something. My face is perfectly neutral. She positioned herself beside me with the practiced subtlety of someone who wanted a full sight line. I'm just standing here, enjoying the event, not watching Brent Hale over there doing that thing where he keeps looking over and then looking away. My stomach pulled tight once. He's looking over? He's been looking over since approximately 90 seconds after you two talked. She sipped her champagne. Tiffany has noticed. She's pretending she hasn't. This is genuinely the most interesting thing that has happened at this gala in 3 years. Dana, I'm being informational. I looked at Reid, who was now in conversation with the councilman again, composed and engaged, and completely at ease in the room the way he was at ease everywhere. Something shifted in my chest, not the tightening of anxiety, something that felt more like clarity arriving. I had spent 18 months building something real. Real work, real floors, real mornings on the lakefront, real conversations with a man who asked follow-up questions and texted my brother about coffee. And Brent, standing across a ballroom recalculating his choices, was not the point of any of it. It was not the reward. It was just a fact about the room tonight. The point was Reid raising his glass from across the crowd. The point was Charlotte and her funding models. The point was me in this dress in this room feeling like a person who belonged here. But then Dana put her hand on my arm. Nora, her voice changed, dropped the performance. He's coming over again. I turned. Brent was walking toward us, without Tiffany this time. He stopped in front of me and Dana made a quiet excuse and disappeared, which I would address with her later in significant detail. Brent looked at me for a moment without saying anything. The easy confidence was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. His drink was almost empty. I owe you an apology, he said. My body went very still. The way things ended, he said. He stopped, tried again. I wasn't honest about how long things had been going on before I said anything to you. And I told myself that was about timing, and I think it was actually about not wanting to have a hard conversation. I looked at him. He was telling the truth. I could see it in the particular discomfort of his face. This was not rehearsed, and not managed, not the version of the story he'd told the table at the Meridian Club dinner. This was a man standing in a ballroom saying something true because he couldn't not say it anymore. I know, I said quietly. He blinked. You knew? I had suspicions. I chose not to dig into it. I made my own choice about what I could carry and what I couldn't. He absorbed that, nodded slowly. Right. A pause. You seem... He stopped himself. What? He looked at me for a long moment. Different. I'm not different, I said. I'm the same. You just didn't see it. That landed. I watched it land. His jaw moved slightly. No, he said after a moment. I don't think that's entirely true. I think you changed when I wasn't paying attention and I missed it. And I think... He stopped again. Brent. I think I made a mistake. The words fell into the space between us and sat there. And I waited for the feeling I'd imagined would come with those words, the vindication, the satisfaction, some residue of the hurt I'd carried collecting its due. I waited for it. It didn't come. What came instead was something quieter, cleaner, almost like sympathy. I don't think you did, I said, and I meant it. I think we wanted different things, and you handled it badly. Those aren't the same as a mistake. He looked at me. Something in his face broke open slightly. Nora, I'm good, Brent. My voice was gentle, fully genuine. I'm actually good. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he looked over my shoulder toward where Reid was standing, and something complicated moved through his expression one final time. He nodded once. Then he turned and walked back through the crowd. I stood where I was. The music continued. The room continued. Reid appeared at my side. I didn't look at him immediately. I was looking at the space where Brent had been, and I was noticing that it felt empty in the way spaces feel empty when they were never really full. What did he say? Reid asked, not demanding, just asking. That he made a mistake, I said. Reid was quiet. I told him he didn't. I turned to look at him. I meant it. Reid studied my face for a moment. His expression was careful and warm and completely open in the way I'd come to understand was what he actually looked like when he wasn't managing anything. Are you okay? He asked. My chest was light, not the careful lightness of managed emotion, actually light. Yeah, I said. But I think I need a drink, and I think the cardamom thing doesn't translate to a Gala bar, so I'm going to have to settle. His mouth moved. I'll find you something. You do that. He went toward the bar. I stood in the middle of the Harrington Foundation Gala in my mother's pearl earrings, and I let the warmth of the room settle around me. Something was about to happen. I didn't know yet exactly what form it would take, but the evening was not finished, and Reid was walking back through the crowd toward me, and Brent was somewhere behind me, and the quartet was playing something beautiful, and I was right where I was supposed to be. The foundation program started at 9. A woman from the board stepped to the podium at the front of the room, and the crowd settled, conversations tapering, chairs pulling toward tables, from the particular rustle of a formal event finding its shape. Reid guided me to the host committee table near the front, round, 8 seats, white linen, a small centerpiece of white flowers I didn't know the name of. I sat beside him, and the room arranged itself around us. The program moved through the expected rhythms. A welcome, a video about the foundation's work, youth education programs, after-school arts initiatives, 3 new community centers on the South Side. The kind of work that was easy to write a check for in a room like this and easy to forget existed when you left. I watched the video and thought about Charlotte and her funding models and made a note in my phone to follow up with her. Reid was called to the podium 20 minutes in. He walked up without ceremony, no adjustment of cufflinks, no visible preparation. As he stood at the microphone and looked at the room the way he looked at everything, taking it in before he spoke. He talked for 4 minutes, not long, but specific, about the South Side Centers, about a particular after-school program that had produced 3 scholarship recipients in the past 2 years, about what the foundation's next phase of funding was going to build. He had numbers, he had names of specific kids, which he mentioned with obvious permission and obvious genuine knowledge, not as props. He talked about his mother growing up in Bridgeport and what access to programs like these had meant for the neighborhood. He didn't perform it. He just said it. The room was completely quiet while he spoke. I sat at the table with my hands in my lap and my chest doing something I didn't have a category for yet. Something that felt like watching a person be completely themselves in public and understanding in real time the full shape of who that person was. He finished. The room applauded. He walked back to the table and sat beside me and reached for his water glass and said quietly, without looking at me, "The youth choir is performing after dessert. They're extraordinary." "Okay," I said. My voice came out slightly smaller than I intended. He looked at me. His eyes moved across my face with that full attention quality. "You all right?" "Yes." I picked up my own water glass, set it down. "You were good up there." "Thank you." "I mean it. You were really good." He studied me for another moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not concern exactly, more like recognition, like he was seeing something and choosing not to name it yet. Eat something, he said gently. The beef Wellington is actually worth it here. I looked down at my plate. I hadn't touched it. I picked up my fork. The thing that nearly unraveled me was not Brent. I want to be clear about that. Brent's apology, Brent's recalculation, Brent's complicated expression as he looked at Reid from across the room. None of that was what tightened my throat during the dessert course when I excused myself and found the corridor outside the ballroom and stood in it with my back against the wall and my eyes on the ceiling. It was Reid. It was 4 minutes at a podium and his mother in Bridgeport, and the way he'd said, eat something like my well-being was a practical matter he was attending to, the way he always attended to things quietly and completely. It was 11 weeks of Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings and follow-up questions, and the green mill and the hockey rink, and his hand finding mine without discussion every time we walked into a room. It was the way Patrick had said he looked at you the whole game, and I had hung up the phone and looked at my floors. I was standing in the corridor of the Palmer House at a black-tie charity gala with my mother's pearl earrings in, and something was trying to open in my chest that I had been managing very carefully for 11 weeks, and I was not sure I could keep managing it. That was what it was. Not Brent, not the past, the present, the specific, terrifying present. My heels were quiet on the corridor carpet. Somewhere behind the closed ballroom doors, the youth choir was warming up. I could hear the faint edge of it, when young voices finding their notes. The corridor was empty, except for a passing waiter who nodded at me and continued on. I pressed the back of my head against the wall. Here was the thing I hadn't said to anyone, not Patrick, not Dana, not even to myself in the fully formed version. Brent leaving had hurt less because of the loss of him specifically, and more because of what it confirmed, that I had given someone the full, unmanaged, actual version of myself, and he had found it insufficient. That the real Nora Callahan, the one who pushed back on timelines and refinished her own floors and ran the lakefront at 5:30 and ordered things without deliberating, was not a person who inspired someone to stay. That was the wound, not Brent, the conclusion he'd left behind. And now there was Reid. Reid who had said you look like yourself, as if that was the best possible thing. Reid who had texted Patrick about coffee. Reid who had stood at the podium and named specific children and his mother's neighborhood like he had nothing to perform for anyone. And I was terrified. Not the cold hands, shallow breath terror of danger. The worst kind. The kind that comes when something is exactly what you want and you're not sure yet if you can trust yourself to reach for it without bracing for it to be taken away. I heard the ballroom doors open. Donna appeared in the corridor. She looked at me against the wall, and her expression went through several things before settling on something careful. "The choir is starting," she said. "I know." She walked toward me slowly, stopped a few feet away, looked at my face. "This isn't about Brent," she said. No. "How long?" I looked at the ceiling. 11 weeks. "Nora." Her voice was warm, exasperated, the voice of a person who had been watching something unfold with full knowledge for longer than the person in it. "He introduced you to everyone tonight by your full name. Both of them. Like it meant something." "I know." "He watched you talk to Charlotte for 20 minutes like you were the most interesting thing in the room, and there were 4 city officials in his direct sight line." "Dana." "I'm being informational," she said. Same line as before. But her eyes were soft. I pressed my lips together. My chest was doing the thing, the full, unmanaged, terrifying thing. "What if it goes wrong?" I said. It came out quiet, more honest than I'd planned. Dana was silent for a moment. Then, "What if it doesn't?" Simple. Clean. The most useful question. I looked at her. "You spent 18 months building something real," she said, "and you did it. You actually did it. And now there's a person standing on the other side of those doors who sees it, and you're out here in a corridor scared of your own good thing." She tilted her head. "That man is not Brent. I know he's not. Your whole body knows he's not. Your brother knows he's not. I've known since approximately the 3rd time you mentioned him in 2 weeks without noticing you were doing it." She paused. "You know he's not." My eyes were warm at the edges. I pressed one finger to the corner of my eye briefly and composed myself. "Don't," Dana said. "Don't you dare cry in this corridor before the choir performs. I will not forgive you." I almost laughed. I'm not crying. Your face is pre-crying. My face is perfectly neutral, she pointed at me. That's what I said earlier, and you called me out immediately. The laugh came out fully then, small but real. The warmth behind my eyes receded. I straightened off the wall, smoothed the front of my dress. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. "Go back in." "In a minute." She looked at me once more, squeezed my arm. Then she went back through the ballroom doors and they closed behind her. The corridor was quiet. I stood in it for another 30 seconds, feeling the carpet under my heels, hearing the muffled opening notes of the choir through the doors, letting the decision I'd already made settle into something solid. Then the doors opened again. "Reid." He stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping into the corridor. As he let the door close behind him, he looked at me, the full attention look, the one that took everything in before he said a word. "You've been out here a while," he said. "I know." He walked toward me slowly, stopped a few feet away. Same distance Dana had kept. Respectful, patient. "The choir's starting," he said. "I know. They're really extraordinary. I don't say things like that lightly." "I know you don't." He looked at me for a long moment. The corridor light was warm and low. Through the doors came the faint sound of young voices opening up into something beautiful. "Nora." His voice was quiet, just my name, but his eyes were asking the full question. I looked at him, at the white suit and the red pocket square, and the expression that was completely open and not managing a single thing. "I'm scared," I said. The words came out steady, plain, no apology around them. He didn't move. "Of what specifically?" "Of this being real and me being wrong about it." "What would wrong look like?" I pressed my lips together. "Like before." He was quiet for a moment. The choir sound swelled slightly through the doors. "I'm not going to tell you it's guaranteed," he said. "That would be a thing I said to make you feel better, and I don't do that." He took one step toward me. "What I can tell you is that I haven't looked at a room in 11 weeks without finding where you were in it first. And I haven't had a conversation worth having that didn't make me want to tell you about it. And the night your brother told me the coffee thing meant you really liked it, I sat with that for an embarrassingly long time." My chest opened. Yet he was close enough now that I could see the particular quality of his expression, not performing certainty, not offering comfort, just telling me the truth and letting me decide what to do with it. "I refinished my own floors," I said, which made no grammatical sense in the conversation, but made complete internal sense. "I know," he said. "That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were exactly who I thought you were." His voice dropped slightly. "Someone who fixes what's worth fixing and knows the difference." My eyes went warm again. I was not going to cry in this corridor. "We should go back in," I said, "for the choir." "We should," he agreed. Neither of us moved for another 5 seconds. Then he offered his hand. Palm up, no pressure, just the offer. I took it. And his fingers closed around mine, and we stood there for a moment in the warm, quiet corridor with young voices rising through the walls and the whole evening waiting on the other side of the door. "Reid." "Yeah." "When we go back in." I looked up at him. "Brent is going to see us." He looked at me steadily. "I know. I don't want it to be about that. It won't be. But it's going to look like something to him." Reid was quiet for a moment. Then, simply, "Let it." Something settled in me completely. The last weight of it, the last careful bracing. Down. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he said. We went back inside. We walked back in during the first song. The choir was already performing when the doors opened. 22 kids from the south side in matching navy tops, voices stacked in tight harmony. It working through something that started quiet and built slowly, the way good things build. The room was still. Even the people who had been talking through the program had gone quiet for this. We slipped back to the host table without drawing attention. Reid pulled my chair out and I sat, and the music filled everything and I let it. I did not look for Brent. That was the first thing I noticed, that I wasn't scanning the room for him. A week ago, maybe even an hour ago, some part of my awareness would have been tracking his location the way you track something that might require management. But sitting in that chair with Reid's hand loosely over mine on the table, the music doing what it was doing to the air in the room, I simply wasn't. The choir moved into a second piece, faster, more complex. The few of the younger kids visibly concentrating in a way that was entirely endearing. One girl in the front row, maybe 13, had a solo line in the second verse, and when she opened up her voice, the table to our left actually audibly responded, a woman pressing her hand to her chest, a man shaking his head slowly like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Reid leaned close to my ear. "Third from the left in the back row," he said quietly. He was terrified at the audition. Couldn't get through 2 bars without stopping, came back and did it again the next day. I looked at the boy he meant. 12, maybe 13. Singing now like stopping was not a concept that applied to him. My throat tightened in the best way. "How do you know that?" I asked. "I was at the audition." I turned to look at him. He was watching the choir with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, unguarded in a way that his professional face never quite was. Something genuinely moved. "You go to their auditions," I said. "When I can." He glanced at me briefly. "They should have someone in the room who's actually paying attention." I turned back to the choir before he could see my face fully. The last song was the longest and the most complex, and by the end of it, the room was on its feet before the final note had fully resolved. Reid stood beside me and I clapped, and the kids on the risers looked out at the room with the particular expression of people who have just done something real and feel the proof of it in their bodies. I clapped until my hands stung. The program wrapped shortly after. The room shifted back into cocktail mode, chairs pushing out, conversations resuming, the bar lines reforming. The quartet picked back up from somewhere behind the risers with something warm and unhurried. Reid was almost immediately claimed by the foundation's executive director, a tall woman named Patricia, who needed him for something involving the next fiscal year's funding commitment. He excused himself with a look at me that asked a question. I answered it with a small nod that said, "Go, I'm fine," and meant it completely. I found Charlotte again. She was at the edge of the room talking to one of the city officials, and when she saw me, she broke off the conversation with minimal ceremony and said, "I was hoping you'd come back. Tell me more about the Meridian Group's community development portfolio." So I did. We talked for 15 minutes and exchanged cards, and she told me she'd been trying to get a meeting with Meridian's community investment arm for 2 years, and I told her I would make that call on Monday, and I meant that too. I was standing, feeling the particular good tiredness of an evening that had been full in all the right ways, when I heard Brent's voice behind me. "Tiffany, you remember Nora?" I turned. They were both there. Brent with his almost empty drink, Tiffany beside him with an expression that was working harder than it had been earlier. A couple I didn't know stood with them, the people they'd been with at the bar when I first spotted them across the room. "Of course," Tiffany said. Her voice was pleasant. The pleasantness had some steel underneath it, and I respected that. "Nice to see you again," I said. The unknown couple introduced themselves, David and Karen, something, from Brent's company. Karen shook my hand warmly. David was already distracted by something over my shoulder. Brent looked at me with the expression he'd been carrying all evening, the one that was still revising itself. Up close, it was clearer now what was in it. Not longing exactly. Something more uncomfortable than longing. The look of a person who has told themselves a story and is standing in the presence of evidence that the story had a significant error. "Are you and Weston?" he started. "Brent," Tiffany said. Her voice was low and had a warning quality. He stopped. Karen looked between us all with the bright, careful expression of someone who understood they were adjacent to something and was not sure whether to retreat. I kept my face open and easy. The not performing ease, actually easy, which felt like the most important distinction of the evening. And then Reid was there. I hadn't heard him approach. He simply appeared at my side the way he had all evening, as if proximity to me was his natural resting position in a room. His hand settled at the small of my back. Present. Certain. He looked at the group. His expression was pleasant, completely composed. David, who had been distracted a moment ago, snapped back to attention at the sight of Reid and extended his hand with the immediate energy of a man who recognized significant professional value. "Reid Weston, David Marsh, huge admirer of what you've built with Weston Capital." Reid shook his hand. "Appreciate it." Karen introduced herself. Reid was warm and direct and gave her his full attention for exactly the right amount of time. And then he looked at Brent. Brent looked back. A beat. "I don't think I caught your name earlier," Reid said, which was not true. He had caught Brent's name and logged it, and they both knew it. The sentence was something else, a small, clean move. "Brent Hale," Brent said. His voice was even. "Right," Reid nodded once, then he looked at Tiffany. "And you're—" "Tiffany Hale." She lifted her chin slightly. "Good to meet you." His attention moved easily back to the group. David was already asking him something about commercial development in the South Loop, and Reid was answering, and I stood beside him and felt the warmth of the room and the music and the evening. David's wife Karen touched my arm lightly and said, "How do you and Reid know each other? Are you in real estate also?" Before I could answer, Reid turned from his conversation with David. He did it naturally, without interruption, just the turn of a man including the full group. "Nora's the director of operations at Meridian Group," he said, and then he paused for exactly one beat. "She's also my wife." The word landed in the air, clean, simple, stated, not performed, not aimed, just said the way you say something that is true and has always been true and will continue to be true. Karen's face opened into a warm smile. "Oh, how wonderful. How long have you been married?" Reid looked at me. I looked at him. Something passed between us in that look that I will not try to explain in detail, because some things lose their truth when you explain them. It was partly the understanding that we were standing in a moment neither of us had planned and both of us were choosing. It was partly the quiet acknowledgement that the word he had just used was larger than this room and this evening. It was partly the particular relief of a thing being named that has been present for a while, waiting. And it was partly the look of two people who find each other genuinely, deeply funny in the best possible way, because the situation was objectively absurd, and we both knew it. "A while," he said. Karen beamed. David shook Reid's hand again, as if the information had upgraded the exchange. I did not look at Brent. I didn't need to, but I felt the shift in the air beside him, the particular quality of a silence that comes from a person recalibrating something they thought they understood. I felt Tiffany's stillness. I felt the moment Karen and David absorbed the information and moved on naturally because to them it was simply a fact about two people at a party. I looked at Reid. He looked at me. His thumb moved once against my back. Small, just for me. I looked forward at the room. The quartet was playing something slow and easy. The chandeliers threw warm light across white linens. Somewhere near the choir risers, I could see the girl with the extraordinary voice talking to one of the foundation board members with the unself-conscious directness of someone who'd just done something remarkable and knew it. Brent said something to Tiffany in a low voice. They excused themselves. Tiffany's goodbye to the group was gracious. Brent didn't meet my eyes on the way out. Karen touched my arm once more and said, "You two are lovely together," and meant it with the sincerity of someone who reads people accurately and calls it as she sees it. And then she and David drifted toward the dessert table, and we were left in a small circle of space. Reid turned to me. His expression was the unguarded one, the one from the corridor. The one I was beginning to understand was the real version. "You okay?" he asked. My chest was full, not heavy full, the other kind. "That was interesting," I said. "Was it? You introduced me as your wife." "I did. To a room full of people. Small subset of the room," he considered. "Maybe 30 people within earshot." "Reid." "Nora." I looked at him, at the white suit and the red pocket square, and the man who went to choir auditions to make sure there was someone paying attention. So the man who texted my brother about coffee. The man who said you look like yourself, like it was the highest possible praise. "Is that what this is?" I asked, quietly. "Just for us." He held my gaze for a long moment, not buying time, letting the question have the weight it deserved. "It's what I want it to be," he said, "if you do." The quartet played something soft. The room moved around us in its warm, indifferent way. "I refinished my own floors," I said again. Third time. Different meaning each time. He almost smiled. "I know. I ran 17 half marathons. I know. I push back on timelines. That's the one that got me," he said. My chest opened completely. The last of the careful bracing. Gone. Okay, I said. Okay, he said. Okay, I said. Yes, that's what this is. He looked at me for a moment longer. Then he took my hand, the full hand, fingers laced, not the back of the ballroom version, and turned toward the room. Then let's finish the evening, he said. As your wife, I said. As my wife, he confirmed. We walked back into the Gala. The drive home was quiet in the way the best drives are quiet. Chicago at night moved past the windows, the lake invisible in the dark, the lights of the buildings we both knew by name. The streets cleared out to that particular late-night ease where the city shows you its actual face. I had my heels off in the back seat, the camel coat over my lap. Reid had his jacket off, the red pocket square sitting on the seat between us. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he said, Charlotte texted me. I turned to look at him. She has your number? She got it from the foundation director. He kept his eyes on the road. She said she met someone tonight who promised to make a call about the community investment portfolio. I did promise that. Monday, he said. Monday, I confirmed. The city continued past the windows. Reid, I said, yeah. Thank you for tonight. He glanced at me. For introducing you as my wife to 30 strangers? For the evening, I said, the whole thing, the choir, Charlotte, standing in the corridor while I figured myself out. I paused. The follow-up questions. He was quiet for a moment. You knew about those? I know about everything, I said. I was paying attention. He smiled. Not the small, controlled version, the full one. Rare and real. I tucked it away like something I was going to come back to. That spring, Reid and I got married in a small ceremony at a venue in the West Loop. 20 people. Patrick's toast that was too long and too honest and that everyone loved. My mother's earrings, floors I'd refinished myself. Reid's mother came from Bridgeport and cried twice. The girl from the choir sang one song because Reid had asked her 6 months earlier, and she had said yes before he finished the sentence. Brent sent a card. I didn't open it for a week. When I did, it said, "Congratulations, I mean it." I believed him. I put the card in a drawer and made coffee and stood in my kitchen on my own good floors in the early morning light and felt, fully and without qualification, like exactly who I was supposed to be.